Today, it feels like forever since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, February 24 marked the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Suddenly, the whole world backed President Zelensky, only to find out 3 years later that the United States is no longer interested. But now, Europe has a plan, a shocking strategy that could save Ukraine and destroy the Russian economy. With diplomatic ties souring between the United States and Ukraine, all hell is about to break loose, and Europe intends to bear the brunt of it. Perhaps this could be a turning point for the war. Ukraine seems to be losing, finally bringing about peace to the continent. But what is this cunning plan? How will it affect geopolitics? Can Europe even go it alone, and at what cost? Since the inauguration of US President Donald Trump, numerous summits have been held in Europe. Some of them are in an emergency capacity, but all with the same goal: to ensure that Ukraine can maintain its sovereignty, drive out the Russian aggressors, and ultimately secure the European continent for the next few decades. It all started with the Paris Emergency Summit, held on February 17th. The idea of this summit was to discuss Europe's response to President Donald Trump taking the unprecedented stance of directly engaging with Russian President Vladimir Putin on bringing an end to the war in Ukraine. With the exclusion of Europe and Ukraine from these peace talks, the EU, as Ukraine's second-largest funder, needed to take action. This summit didn't yield much aside from speculation. Both British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron vaguely stated that Europe might send boots to Ukraine in order to enforce a peace agreement. The meeting further focused on increased defense spending for European countries, with the UK being the first to pull the trigger. Britain announced that it would reduce its foreign aid budget from 0.5% of total GDP to just 0.3%. This is in a bid to increase its own defense spending to 2% of its GDP by 2027. Everything was seemingly in control, and Europe had a plan. Backed by US funding, Europe would also increase its funding to ensure that Ukraine would still be a viable actor in this war. Then this happened. The move sent shockwaves through the Western world, leading to an emergency summit being once again called on March 2nd. This time it was held in London, under the guidance of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. In stark contrast to President Trump, Starmer reaffirmed his alliances with the people of Ukraine, vowing to continue the fight. Among the attendees were key stakeholders in the war, including French President Emmanuel Macron, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. However, the shadowy omission of President Donald Trump was clearly visible as Europe began planning how to defend Ukraine without US support. Unfortunately, the summit didn't reveal any actionable plan, but only sought to reaffirm Europe's allegiance and support for Ukraine. Various other commitments were made, including the affirmation of new sanctions that could potentially destroy Russia's economy, while Starmer added that the UK would spend another £1.6 billion to buy 5,000 air defense missiles in an attempt to support Ukraine. Moreover, a lot of emphasis was placed on Ukrainian sovereignty, a move Europe stands by firmly to ensure that peace negotiations will not exclude Ukraine. But most importantly, Europe formed what is now referred to as the Coalition of the Willing. This brand new term refers to a few European countries who are willing to back Ukraine despite the United States focusing on a different method to bring about peace. As of this video, we only know that France and the UK have been confirmed as part of this coalition. However, NATO allies such as Turkey, Spain, Italy, Germany, Poland, and Denmark might also follow suit. The goal of this coalition is to send boots to the Ukrainian border. Once a demilitarized zone has been established, these countries will put in the effort to protect the country from another wave of Russian aggression. The outcome of the meeting was generally positive, with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau even taking a swipe at President Trump. In reference to Trump's Truth Social posting, where he called Zelensky a dictator, Trudeau would go on to call Zelensky a duly elected Democratic leader. This was undoubtedly a swipe aimed at President Trump. But Trump retaliated just 2 days later. Yes, President Trump would go on to pause aid to Ukraine. But this not only referred to new aid, but even current aid already approved under the Biden administration. It would be a move that totally caught Europe off guard. And once again, an emergency summit was called in the EU capital of Brussels. The summit was conducted to see if Europe could further increase its support for Ukraine, including the focus on the evolving security landscape. Just 2 days before the summit, Europe announced what they call the new bomb bank. The idea of this new bank is to help all European countries loan money to buy more military equipment. This can be used for either personal security reasons or to help Ukraine. In fact, this shows just how much the EU is currently panicking with President Trump in office. Even though President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer have both met with the Trump administration just 1 week earlier. Neither of these meetings turned into what the world would see when Zelensky visited the White House, leaving the public believing that perhaps ties between Europe and the United States might not be as rocky as was predicted. But as Europe holds these summits, it does mean that an actual plan is busy unraveling, and it could perhaps stun Russia in a way that will see Ukraine earn some leverage when they finally come to the negotiation table. So, what is this plan? Please subscribe to our channel to stay informed of the latest Ukraine-Russia news. First of all, it is important to understand that the plan to defend Ukraine is fluid. It is evolving hour by hour as new stakeholders enter and determine what they can do to ensure this war doesn't escalate any further. Europe has already announced a fresh package of sanctions, marking the 16th such package to hit Russia. This has so far had an enormous effect on the Russian economy, sending interest rates soaring to more than 20% and inflation hovering just below the 10% mark. By all accounts, this was the first and easiest move for the EU to take. Secondly, another $21 billion could be on the table, which encompass everything from military aid, humanitarian aid, and moreover, funds to assist in the rebuilding of Ukraine should peace negotiations finally be confirmed. The words of European Council President Antonio Costa describe the situation Europe faces best. We are living a defining moment for Ukraine and European security. Thirdly, Ukraine and Europe should both have a seat at the negotiation table, and there will not be any peace unless Ukraine can retain sovereignty over its territory. This was echoed by all the leaders who attended these summits and are willing to participate in the coalition of the willing. This basically boils down to the fact that Europe is willing to go all out for this war. Instead of focusing on allowing the United States to push forward, the EU seems hell-bent on pushing forward with ensuring the safety of Ukraine and its people. Now, the question is very simple. Can Europe do this alone, or will they need the United States? Well, to explore this, it is important to understand the kind of threat the EU is currently facing. Russia initially stationed between 160,000 and 190,000 on the Ukrainian border before the invasion. According to various experts, the total had increased to about 700,000 active troops fighting in Ukraine by June 2024. Then North Korea intervened, sending another batch of troops to Ukraine, tallying around 10,000. Despite this massive force, Russia had to replace more than 860,000 troops due to injuries and fatalities since the start of the war. This made a massive dent in the estimated 1.5 million active troops Russia claims to have in the country. Moreover, fatalities alone account for more than 160,000 troops being removed from the battlefield, a figure estimated by independent Russian media outlets Medusa and Mediazona. Furthermore, Kiev estimates that Russia has lost a lot of military equipment since the start of the war. This includes more than 10,000 tanks, 23,000 artillery systems, another 38,000 military and support vehicles, 1,000 air defense systems, 331 helicopters, 370 aircraft, more than 25,000 drones, and another 28 ships. It is worth noting that these figures might not be accurate, and other outlets, including the BBC, put the death toll for Russia at 95,000. This could bring into question how much Russia has lost. Nevertheless, this gives a scope of just how much of a threat Russia is. The Russian military still claims to have at least 1.5 million active troops and another 2 million in reserve. The current state of Russia's military equipment is still unknown. Additionally, the influx of Iranian drones has also given the Kremlin a rapidly expanding arsenal that will still pose a major threat to Ukrainian troops. Russia have reported that in 2024 alone, 1,550 tanks, 5,700 armored vehicles, and 450 artillery pieces were developed. This gives an indication of exactly how much Russia can produce to reinforce its front line. This doesn't even begin to cover the vast numbers of drones that Russia is currently producing with the assistance of Iran. An increase of more than 430% in production means that Russian stockpiles keep on growing. Looking back at 2024, specifically the month of May, saw Russia launch more than 300 of these drone attacks, which was a significant increase following the months prior. These numbers are quite staggering, but what's even more shocking about Russia's armament is the fact that Russia is actually planning a military exercise called the Zapad military exercises to take place in Belarus. This is unprecedented considering that countries generally only do military drills during peace times. Even more alarming is looking back at the 2021 Zapad exercises. Here, both countries deployed a combined number of almost 90 aircraft, almost 300 tanks, more than 750 military pieces, and 240 artillery pieces. What this suggests is that Russia has an incredible stockpile, but this was before the war had even started. Denmark's Defense Intelligence Service, DDIS, a counterpart to the United States CIA, has also raised alarms, suggesting that, at the current rate, Russia could launch a full invasion of Europe in less than 5 years. However, this is merely fear-mongering, and various factors would make this almost impossible. Such a scenario would almost certainly lead to a nuclear conflict, and with mutually assured destruction a real possibility, this will deter Russia by itself. Regardless, this poses a massive threat to Europe, especially with the United States no longer sending aid to Ukraine. So, can Europe make this new plan work? The EU has recently announced a plan to raise more than $800 billion for defense spending. The exact number, according to EU President Ursula von der Leyen, is $841 billion to be spent over 4 years. The problem is that this will only happen if every EU country actually chips in and pays their part, a proposition that might not happen given countries like Turkey are only willing to participate if they are included in peace talks. Nevertheless, this $800 billion will only be available over 4 years, meaning that Europe will have around $210 billion per year. The figure will mainly focus on bolstering Europe's own defense and to break its dependency on the United States. What the media fails to tell you is the fact that the United States will spend more than $800 billion on its defense in 2024 alone. This includes security guarantees for Europe. In layman's terms, Europe still relies on the United States for its defense capabilities, despite doing everything within its power to raise these funds. The EU president also proposed borrowing more than $150 billion, according to Reuters, which should be evenly split amongst the European countries to fill up the gap the United States is leaving. Should all this fall in place, it will still leave a gaping hole in the defenses of Europe, who will still need to rely on the United States for a couple of years to bolster its defensive spending. Problem is that Trump has mentioned possibly removing the United States from NATO, which could immediately leave Europe vulnerable. But aside from Europe, how does the EU plan to shore up the gaping hole left by the United States? Well, the US has provided around $180 billion in aid to Ukraine. This is split over various aid packages, which focus on military aid, humanitarian aid, and various other commitments. On the other hand, Europe is reported to have given in the range of $150 billion in aid. It is spread similarly over various forms of aid. But for this current situation, military aid will be needed. The U.S. has given approximately $66 billion in military aid, with Europe just shy of $40 billion. Currently, a lot of that $60 billion is paused, and this needs to be filled by someone. In essence, Europe would need to increase its spending to at least 0.12% of its GDP if it is to fill this gap. This doesn't sound like much, right? Well, aid is a massive strain on a country's economy. In this case, aid is needed, but ramping it up will drastically harm other areas of government. This was a major point analyzed in the lead-up to the 2024 U.S. elections. But Europe has not yet stated what the actual price of peace has been since the invasion. Furthermore, Europe needs to focus on rebuilding its own militaries instead of just sending aid. The British Army is currently at its smallest in modern history. The German military is non-existent. And according to Jim Townsend, the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, European armies are too small to handle even the arms that they've got now. And Europe knows this, which is why a very rapid need to increase defense spending has arisen. So, how do you balance the need for internal defense spending and sending billions of dollars in aid to a foreign country? Well, Ukraine does estimate that it has enough stockpiles and reserves to continue this war for at least the next 6 months. This gives the EU a little bit of breathing room. But Ukraine will inevitably cede more territory. This was apparent in 2024 when the U.S. Congress couldn't agree on aid to be sent to Ukraine. It ultimately left Kyiv fighting on the back foot and prioritizing resources. Ukraine lost a lot of territory, which is likely to happen once again. However, there is another strategy. This one is opposed by many in the EU, but it could be the only solution. It has now firmly been established that Europe is unable to fully fill the gap of the United States. Keir Starmer has affirmed the need for U.S. support in this endeavor. Donald Trump has proposed a plan whereby Ukraine signs away its mineral rights to the U.S. According to Trump, this would naturally bring peace to Ukraine. Should the United States gain access to these minerals, Trump proposes to send U.S. companies to Ukraine. These civilians will mine these minerals. President Trump believes that having U.S. civilians on the ground will naturally avert any Russian aggression. But Zelensky doesn't seem to think that this idea would work. Europe hasn't yet commented on this agreement, currently choosing to go it alone. Moreover, the Trump tariffs might also affect the rest of Europe, leading to an even bigger drop in available funds for Europe to use. Finally, there has been no indication from the Kremlin whether Putin is willing to accept this agreement, a situation that could potentially make or break this deal. Ultimately, the United States Supreme Court has rejected the freezing of foreign aid, which means that aid might once again flow to Kyiv, allowing Europe enough of a buffer to strengthen its defenses. The question is how this will all play out in the next few weeks. With Europe gravely dependent on the United States, it remains a mystery on how this would play out. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to remain up to date with everything happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. Thanks for watching.